Good morning. Great to have Johnny back, huh? What a beautiful week it's been. Starting with our great Memorial Day picnic. Wasn't that a blast? I just want to give a big shout out to Devontae. Now, Devontae got there at 5:45 a.m. And because on Memorial Day, it's first come, first serve. And by 6:15, people were trying to take the spot. So thank you, Devontae. It was a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun. Of course, the food was awesome. Cipriana made this food for everybody. You know, everybody's going to be knocking on her door now. Some good Filipino food. That was awesome. And all the games going on. You know, you got Brian trying to throw football with the kids. You know, that's always entertaining just to watch. So, anyways, we had a lot of fun. It was a great week. Of course, Johnny's with us now, so he's officially part of us. I have a lot of great stories, and I'll have to tell you about that at another time. Yeah, lunchtime. Okay, so, and then we have our graduates, AJ, you know, just growing up. What's this world coming to? Can we handle it? You know what I love about the church is the family feel that we have created here. It's awesome. In fact, when people come in, they talk about it. They say, man, you guys, it just feels like family. And on Monday, when we had our picnic, Carlos's parents were there. And we've been getting with Ivan throughout the last few months. Brian and I have been getting with them. And his wife came out by the name of Gloria. And she grabbed me on the arm. She said, "This is awesome." You know, and she's older than I am. I was like, oh, okay. And she's like, I love the family feel and the diversity. So it's true. It impacts people. Now, the things that I have learned over my years is that it's very hard to be unified. It's very easy to be divided. It takes a lot of effort. And it's very challenging that you got to be able to go sometimes where you don't want to go to be united. And then the challenge is to stay united. Very hard. And we can see in society, the divorce rate, 60% of all marriages. And now people aren't even willing to get married. They assume that they're just not going to make it. So many wars on the planet going on all the time because people just can't get unified. Bitterness. I appreciate so much what Shanice said. Can you relate with that? Bitterness towards a family member. You go to a reunion and you feel the tension. And it's sad because this is the world we live in. And even in churches, you find disunity. Why is it that at Sunday mornings, Christianity is the most separated time of the week? Because they can't get unified. We're going to talk about it. Thank you. We're going to talk about it. That's what we're going to do. Now, recently, Barb and I went to a retreat that we had with what we call the PAC 8. PAC 8 leaders in the PAC group are leaders of churches over different states. And it was a time to get unified. And the reason being is this COVID thing had stopped us from spending time and getting together. And we had plans to meet. We actually were supposed to meet in the Ukraine in May of this year. Yeah, and so that didn't happen. Then they said, well, let's go to Istanbul. And we couldn't do that. Now, you got to realize it's not just America. We got people from Eurasia, part of the PAC group. And so we ended up in Galena, Illinois. That's what we did. Close. But it's great to talk to the leadership because you hear what they're going through and you can relate. But some of them are out there. Of course, you get people from Ukraine and Russia, and you you understand that their battle is a little different than ours. And we sometimes forget. Even in Canada, things are different than here. How they handle things are different than here. And so it's a great thing to talk through and get to know each other, all right? But the challenge, too, is to understand, all right, now we got a job to do. We got to plant all these churches. And we got to be unified in planting these churches. So in the last year and this year, we've literally planted 6 churches. That's pretty amazing. And it's a unified effort because it takes money and it takes timing and funds and who's going to move who, and then who's going to go on the plantings. And so you got to really weigh those things out, and you got to get unified with the people coming on the plantings. Now, when we planted the Milwaukee church here, we started with 21 people. We landed here, and what we did was we spent a lot of time together. We did a lot of fun things and just did things to get to know each other because we were having people from all over, from LA to Boston to Chicago to New York. And it's the same thing. Now we're going through that with Kentucky. All right? And so far what we got is 2 from Houston, 1 from New Haven, Connecticut, 1 from Seattle, 2 from Columbus, 2 from Detroit, and 5 from here. All right, now a lot of them don't know each other. But for various reasons, they're coming together, and some of them have family there, and some of them feel a need. And so now Victor and Marlene have got a huge challenge to create unity, to move forward. Of course, we have a purpose together. That's awesome. We can begin with that. We have the scriptures, but still there's always these little things that, like, you got to work through. How people feel, okay? Feelings. Feelings can get in the way. So they asked me to do a lesson there, and I thought I'd share it with you. And it's called, the title of the lesson is United We Stand. Okay, and of course I'm going to tweak it a lot for our situation versus there. Now when you study the Bible, you realize that it's all about unity. That's the whole Bible. United with each other and united with God. Open your Bibles to 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Now, I Googled United We Stand. Common phrase, right? And all sorts of interesting things came up. Of course, a lot of people use it in speeches when you're going to war or in politics. A lot of understanding that we just need unity. And the question is, when did this thing start? Who came up with that? And somewhere in there they said Aesop's Fables. You guys heard of Aesop? He was a guy who wrote a lot of these little stories that you grew up as a child reading, like I think the heron and the turtle and the, yeah. I think stuff like that. And I'm like, really? Now, I remember years ago, I get into famous quotes and stuff like that, and there was a book on quotes, and they had one for John Kennedy. And it said, "A kingdom divided against itself cannot stand." That's what I said. I was like, that's not Kennedy, it's in the Bible. Then it makes you wonder, how many other quotes aren't from, Of course, Jesus said it. You don't have to go there. Mark 3:25 says, if a house is divided against itself, it cannot stand. Matthew 12:25, every kingdom divided against itself will be ruined. And Luke 11, verse 17, any kingdom divided against itself will be ruined. All right, Jesus understood it too. It's all about unity. The word united means to act as a single entity. Now, in sports, you understand if you're not, working together as a team, you don't win. And it's the same here with us. We have to work together. Now, in the early church, this was a problem. And, of course, it always takes a lot to get unified, especially you got people from different countries way back when. And so Paul begins to write the church in Corinth, and it's all about unity. And if you read the book of Ephesus, all about unity. If you read the Bible, all about unity. All right, well, we're going to look at some issues here. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 10. It says, I appeal to you, brothers, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you agree with one another so that there may be no divisions among you, and that you may be perfectly united in mind and thoughts. Now you think about that. Perfectly united in mind and thought. Not just perfectly united, but in the way you think. That's really radical, because we don't think like each other. And that's point number one, united in mind and thought. But Paul makes an appeal to the city, to the church, to be perfectly united. That means it takes a lot of effort. Now, I know I don't think like a lot of you, and there's a lot of different reasons, all right? I know you're thinking now. I understand that. All right, I want to make an example of this. I'm going to have JV stand up. Yeah, JV. All right. All right, now, there's a few differences between JV and I. Yeah, just a few. All right, and, I'm a little older than JV. All right, still lovable, thank you. I don't think like JV. And in fact, sometimes it scares me, okay, to go into the mind, all right? JV's a lot younger than I am. He has not experienced the things that I've experienced. Back in high school or grade school, you get in trouble for throwing erasers or chewing gum. Now, look at what's going on in the schools. I was not raised in that kind of background, and JV's background, how he is raised, was radically different. He's black. I'm white. Yeah. I know. All right. I don't know what it's like to grow up in a black background where he grew up. I grew up in Green Bay, very white at the time. The only black people were Packers and their kids, and they were awesome, so, black people were awesome. This is how you thought. But we had American Indian up there, and that was trouble. All right, so there's all these different things. Now, we sometimes don't speak the same language. He's been helping me out. He's like bet and lit and drip. Every so often he's saying, we're chopping it up. Oh, okay, we're cutting up veggies or something, I don't know. The gadgets, the phone. I didn't grow up on this. Imagine if all of a sudden nobody could use a phone starting tomorrow. That was my life up until 20 years ago. I'm going to be 63. So for 40-some years, we didn't have this. Imagine that. Very crazy. Of course, he doesn't even understand that. It's oblivious to it. All the gadget stuff. The calculator came out when I was in high school. That was exciting. Look at this. We had the slide rule, okay? And there's something else. I'm better looking than JV. Yeah. Hey, come on. He can't help it. You can sit down. Just sit down. And no, they didn't use an abacus before the calculator, okay? They had a thing called a slide rule. Do you guys know about that? Okay, amen. No. All right. And there's a radical difference, seriously, how we think. I got to get united with JV. I got to understand his world. And so there's no substitute for time there, getting to know and understand what he's gone through. And for him to do the same for me. That's what builds relationships. I'm going to have Maria stand up. Maria. All right, we got a different dynamic here. She was raised in Mexico. I was not raised in Mexico. I was raised in northern Wisconsin, God's country. Okay. I don't speak the language, all right? But there is a unity here. Maria lived with us for a month, and it was a blessing, okay? But understanding what she's gone through, I can't. And on top of which, she's a woman. And sometimes it's scary to go there for me. All right, now I had 3 daughters, try as I might, but there's a unity here. You can go ahead and sit down. We understand what it's going to take this to where Paul is calling us. Perfectly united in mind and thought. You know, the scariest thing to me is the sexual revolution that's gone on. Started, I believe, in the 60s, and you had a lot of radical stuff happening. You had a number of high-profile people killed. John F. Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr. Imagine that in our society today. And it rocked the world of the people. Before it was, you know, we're done with the war, done with Korean War, and everybody was just about family and peace and all that. And then all of a sudden, boom, boom, boom. Then you had Vietnam. And then all of a sudden the drugs came in, and then the sexual revolution. And so I've seen this thing go. And now, what's going to happen to your kids? How are you going to relate with them? And yet everything is in the scriptures to help us to understand how to get there. As a leader, I need to understand you, and you need to understand me. I got to walk a mile in your shoes before I can get there. No substitute for time. But let's read on, chapter 2, verse 9. Paul continues to talk about unity. This is how we're going to do it. Verse 9. However, as it is written, no eye has ever seen, no ear has heard, no mind has conceived what God has prepared for those who love him. Let's just stop there. No mind has conceived what God has prepared for those who love him. Once again, it's the thinking. Our minds need to change. But God has revealed it to us by how? His Spirit. So God has revealed to us how he thinks. The Spirit searches all things, even the deep things of God. For who among men knows the thoughts of man except the man's spirit within him? In the same way, no one knows the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God. We have not received the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, that we may understand what God has freely given us. So when a person gets baptized, it says we receive the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. And so we can understand how God thinks. He says it's not the spirit of the world. There is a radical difference in the way God thinks and the world thinks. Verse 13, this is what we speak, not in words taught by what? Human wisdom, but in words taught by the Spirit, expressing spiritual truths in spiritual words. Where do you go for that? The Bible. The man without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him. People reject the Bible all the time. They're foolish. They can't get it. And he cannot understand them because they are spiritually discerned. They can't get it. They don't think on a spiritual level. You know, it's amazing to me. You can go to different countries in the world, and it seems like people get converted real easy. Why? Because they're not as worldly as we are. They think on a spiritual level. When we went to school in Malaysia, I was shocked. Religion was the number one form of conversation. Everybody talked about religion. You don't find that here. It's about money here. It's about job. It's about all sorts of stuff. Religion, don't bring that up. And so here he's saying, listen, we have the mind of Christ. Let's read on, verse 15. The spiritual man makes judgments about all things, but he himself is not subject to any man's judgment. For who has known the mind of the Lord, that he may instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ. So if you want to know how God thinks, it's right here. He says we have the mind of Christ. And with the Spirit interacting with the Bible, we can understand it. And that's what can unify us. The same Spirit and the same thinking. And it transcends everything. Why? Because mankind still struggles with the same thing it did 2,000 years ago. Hatred, greed, lust, it's all the same. And those are the areas you need to go to deal with so we can get united. We need to be completely united mind thought. Why? Because united we stand. United we stand. The goal for us is to think like Jesus. Philippians 4, you don't have to turn there. It's simple. Paul writes, he says simply, it says, whatever is pure, right, noble, lovely, admirable, excellent, praiseworthy, think about such things. Imagine if everybody here did that. Everybody in the world only thought about pure things. Only thought about lovely things, noble things, right things, admirable things, excellent, praiseworthy. Man, our whole society would transform. That is the mind of God. Total pure in his thinking. That's crazy, but a reality. And so you got to fight the battle up here. Mentally, you've got to fight to think alike. Let's look at an example about this. 1 Corinthians 3, starting verse 1. Paul writes on, he says, brothers, I could not address you as spiritual, but as worldly, mere infants in Christ. I gave you milk, not solid food, for you're not ready for it. Indeed, you're still not ready. You're still worldly. For since there's jealousy and quarreling among you, are you not worldly? Are you not acting like mere men? For when one says, I follow Paul, and another, I follow Apollos, are you not mere men? What after all is Paul, Apollos? And what is Paul? Only servants, through whom you came to believe, as the Lord has assigned to each his task. I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God made it grow. So neither he who plants, nor he who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow. The man who plants and the man who waters have one purpose, and each one will be rewarded according to his own labor. For we are all God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building. Okay, what is Paul doing here? He's saying, let me show you how you should think. And he starts off, he says, let's start off with a fact. He says, I couldn't address you as spiritual because you're worldly. You think like the world. And he says, you're infants in Christ. In other words, you're immature in your spiritual thinking. He says, I gave you milk, not solid food, for you're not ready for it. And you're still not ready. He says, you got quarreling and fighting going on. That's worldly. That's immature. And then he uses an example. He says, one of you says, I follow Apollos. One of you says, I follow Paul. He says, hey, who are we? He says, we're but servants. In other words, you got to get it spiritually understood that nobody is anything except for Jesus. That we are all ground level. There's not a hierarchy in Christianity. We're all on the same level, and we should treat each other the same. Otherwise, you're thinking worldly. And I've shared that before. There'll be people who come in, oh, you're the pastor, oh, and they treat me like, and I'm like, oh, it's uncomfortable. And then I'll go talk to a visitor, and they're like, oh, you're the pastor, okay, It's like, wow, how have you been trained? I can have a relationship with you. I was talking to Jericho earlier. He's like, hey, we didn't get together this week. I said, yeah, you're right. Let's get together next week. Everybody should feel free to be able to relate to anybody in the church. The question is, how do you think? The leaders are just servants. says they're not anything. Only God is who makes things grow. I don't care how much you lead and how much you do. If God doesn't make it grow, it's a waste of time. You know, there's different roles that people have in the church. All right, you got Marcus and Heather, right? They have a role. Oh, by the way, it's their 2-year anniversary on Tuesday. A whopping 2 years old. That's awesome. So if you've got any problems in your marriage, go talk to them. Barb and I, we have a role. Vlad and Nicole have a role. Elise, Brian, Shernice, Johnny, Shane. And they can't be prideful about their role. I'm a Bible talk leader. Yeah, look at me. That kind of thing. No. God could take you out of that role just as fast. Let's read on, chapter 4, verse 2. Now it is required that those who have been given a trust must prove faithful. I care very little if I am judged by you or by any human court. Indeed, I do not even judge myself. My conscience is clear, but that does not make me innocent. It is the Lord who judges me. Therefore, judge nothing before the appointed time. Wait till the Lord comes. He will bring to light what is hidden in darkness and will expose the motives of men's hearts. At that time, each will receive praise from God. Now, brothers, I have applied these things to myself and Apollos for your benefit, so that you may learn from us the meaning of saying, do not go beyond what is written. Then you will not take pride in one another, one man over against another. For who makes you different from anyone else? Do you have that you did not receive? What do you have that you did not receive? And if you did receive it, why do you boast as though you did not? Okay, what does all that mean? He starts off by saying you've been given a trust. In other words, each one of us has a role. The question is, how are you doing with what God has given you? Is it worldly or is it spiritual? Okay? Then he goes on, he says, I care very little if I'm judged by you or by any human court. What does he mean by that? Paul is saying, listen, I'm not controlled by what you think. It is your opinion. You know whose opinion it matters? God's. If you care more what God thinks, you'll be fine. Everybody's got an opinion. It doesn't matter. People will tell you and say all sorts of things, and if you live and die by what people think, you'll hate your life, because everybody's got their own opinion. Jesus was perfect, and they killed him. It was their opinion. It was their sin. And Paul is saying, listen, I'm not controlled by that. That's worldly thinking. We need to care what God thinks. And then we can be united. It's amazing how so many people, they'll go to work and they'll have a great day and then they're leaving, and then all of a sudden somebody says something and boom, they're down in the pits. And they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. Is that real? Is that? And they lose their joy because of someone's opinion. And Paul says, I don't care. That's worldly thinking. And he says, God will bring to light the motives of everybody's hearts and everything else. Now, he says, I've applied these things to Apollos and myself. And he says, you got to learn from the meaning of the saying, do not go beyond what is written. In other words, if somebody's given you an opinion about the scriptures and it's not there, don't listen to it. That's an opinion. And I did that. I challenged an evangelist one time. I said, hey, what you're teaching is not true. And he said, well, it's my opinion. I said, I don't care. You don't teach that. Because people will think it's truth. It's just your opinion. And you got to be strong about that, because there's a standard here. When you start throwing out your own opinions, all of a sudden you start creating division. I had like 4 or 5 people come up to me on, hey, that's not right. I said, go talk to them. I already did. And that's the way it's got to be. Don't go beyond what is written. We're not going to be unified if you do. And he goes on, he says, what makes you different from anyone else? What did you have? What do you have that you did not receive? Why are you boasting about how you're great at this? And God gave it to you. And so it's worldly thinking. Now, this is a big deal, guys, because if we allow our hearts to go there, we'll get deceitful. We'll start saying things that aren't accurate so that other people will think more highly of us. And we can get embarrassed because if the truth comes out, all right, it'll knock us down. Well, you need to care more what God thinks. You need to be an honest individual. And so it's a scary thing because people will tweak the numbers, whether it's at work or anywhere else, to make things look better than they are. That's very worldly. If you're controlled by what people think. We can't do that. We got to think the way Jesus did. All right, let's look at another example. Chapter 6, verse 1. Verse 1. Paul's writing, he says, if any of you have a dispute with another, dare he take it before the ungodly for judgment instead of before the saints? Do you not know that the saints will judge the world? And what was going on is they were taking each other to court. And Paul's like, what are you doing? How are you going to convert these people if they see you can't be unified? That's ridiculous. Let's read on. Verse 7, the very fact that you have lawsuits among you means you have been completely defeated already. Why not rather be wronged? Why not rather be cheated? Instead, you yourselves cheat and do wrong, and you do this to your brothers. He's saying, hey, the fact that you have lawsuits, you've already been defeated. You've missed the big picture here. It's about unity. And he says, why not rather be wronged? It's more important to be unified than to be right. It's more important to be righteous than right, to do the right thing. Well, it's not fair. Well, where is that anywhere in the Bible that things should be fair? Why do you expect people to act godly who aren't disciples? And we get attitudes at work. But in the kingdom, there should be a whole other standard. It doesn't matter. Yeah, go ahead, take it. I don't care. I care more about being unified with you than this little argument. And that's spiritual thinking. That's going to create unity. Versus pride gets in, hey, I'm going to stand my ground. Nobody's going to get the better of me. That creates disunity. We got to fight to think the same. I appreciate Kip McKean. One time, a number of years ago, when Barb and I were leading the Chicago church, we were supposed to have a couple come and speak, a Hispanic couple there from Mexico. They were going to speak to our Latin ministry. And they couldn't come. Kip kind of shut it down for different reasons. And Kip called me, and he said, hey, they're not coming, blah, blah. How are you doing with that? And I said, I'm fine. We'll figure it out. It is what it is. And he said, no, I mean about you and me. Are we good? And he didn't want to assume that I just had a good heart, okay? He wanted to press the issue. How are you feeling about me? Now, this is the leader of the movement. Who am I? I'm like, oh my gosh, absolutely. But the fact that he thought enough to care says a lot. And that's how we got to be treating each other. Let's look at an example of all this. Go to 1 Samuel chapter 18. Got to pull the Old Testament in here. 1 Samuel 18, starting in verse 1. Okay, a little background here. So you got David. David is the guy who killed Goliath, right? He's a young guy. And very successful. And the king, his name is Saul. He has a son named Jonathan. And Jonathan is the next guy to be in line to be king. But Jonathan and David build this incredible relationship. So this is point number 2, one in spirit. 1 Samuel 18, verse 1. It says, after David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return to his father's house. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing, gave it to David, along with his tunic, even his sword, his bow, and his belt. Okay, so here you got the king's son, and it says he loved David as himself. In fact, it says that 2 times. And it says also that he made a covenant with David. That's an agreement. You know, back in 1982, when I first joined the church, the guy who began to mentor me, he said, I need to make a covenant with you. I was like, oh, okay. And he turned to Amos 3:3. You don't need to go there. It simply says, do 2 walk together unless they agree to do so? He says, I need to know that you're going to walk with me, that I'm going to train you. I want you to commit to this. And I thought, this is awesome. And as you study out the scriptures, you see that's what Jesus did. Come follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. There's an agreement. You follow me, this is the result. But there has to be a commitment. And Jonathan does this with David. He says, I'm committing to you. Let's commit to each other. And it really shows the unity here. And he shows it by taking off, it says, his bow, what does it say? His tunic, his sword, his bow, and his belt. What did that signify? He's giving over the kingship over to David. He's the next in line, and he's saying, you know what, David? You're better than I am. You do this, the kingdom will fare greater under your leadership than under mine. Now that's godly thinking. Jonathan's like, I don't care. I don't need the pat on the back. I don't need the accolades. It's better for you to lead this thing. That's amazing that he would have that kind of heart and being one in spirit. You know, John the Baptist did this with Jesus. In John 3, verse 30, we find that John the Baptist, of course, he prepared the way for Jesus coming. He's saying, hey, he's coming, right? And everybody listened to John the Baptist. He had this huge following. Jesus shows up, and he passes the baton on to Jesus. And his people are like, hey, he's becoming greater. People are following him. And John says, yeah, he must become greater. I must become less. That's unity. That's like, let me get out of the way here. And there's going to become a time when I have to do that. I'm getting older, forgetting things, walking into things, that kind of thing. And then maybe it's Johnny. He's a young buck, right? He comes walking in, meandering in. And there comes a point in time where I got to pass the baton off. My pride will say, no, I can still do it. I can't read anymore, but I can do it. And who are you, by the way? That kind of thing. But it just shows the heart. It's thinking like Jesus would think. It's thinking like God would think. Now, here's the challenging thing. Are you excited when someone does an amazing job? Or does it make you look bad? Do you feel threatened? Why are they getting the pat on the back? Does it encourage you when someone does poorly and fails? And you can feel better about yourself. This is some worldly thinking. That's what happens. The Bible says to rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. Feeling what they feel and inspiring them out of it. Let's read on. 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 41. Okay, a number of months have gone by here, and Saul is jealous of David. Saul's the king, and he wants to kill David. And Jonathan's like freaked out. What are you doing? And so they know they need to separate. in 1 Samuel 20, verse 41, it says, after the boy had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone, bowed down before Jonathan 3 times with his face to the ground. Then they kissed each other and wept together, but David wept the most. Jonathan said to David, go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord is witness between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever. Then David left, and Jonathan went back to his town. Okay, so there's a separation point here. Point number 3 is mutual respect. David bows down to Jonathan 3 times. It's a spirit of humility. Humility creates unity. Pride destroys unity. Now, here's the question. Is there anyone you look down on in the church? That creates disunity, and that's just pride. What makes you better than them? On Judgment Day, what do we deserve? We deserve hell. Anything above that is icing on the cake. If God were to ask you on Judgment Day, why do you deserve to go to heaven? What would you say? What would you say? And the spirit of humility, we need to understand it's not about us. It's just what Paul was saying earlier. We're nothing. It's only God who makes things grow. We need to respect one another. We need to respect each other. Why? Because we're children of God. All of us. Elisha, he's a child of God. Right? Phil, child of God. Bronze, yes, even bronze. Child of God. Bree, Christy, Shernice, Antasia, Sabrina. These are God's daughters. Now, there needs to be a healthy respect for each other because we're children of God. And what does that mean? That means how you treat them says something to God. Now, I have 3 daughters, and they're awesome. How you treat them communicates something to me. You want to love me, love my children. And God says the same thing, love my children. Whether they're disciples or not, whether they're in the church or not. Why? Because they are all God's creation. And that's God's heart. Jesus died for them. What are you willing to do for Jesus' children? Philippians 2, it says, consider others better than yourselves. That creates unity. We do it because united we stand, divided we fall. You don't want to be divided by God. That's not a good thing. The question is, are you bonded in spirit with one another? You know that there was a mutual respect here, but there's also an emotional bond. And that's point number 4. It says, they kissed each other, they wept together, but David wept the most. There was a bond that went deep. The question is, how deep are your bonds? And it says that they, in verse 42, go in peace, for we have sworn what? Friendship. And that's showing where they were at. They were friends. There was an emotional bond there. In fact, Jesus says that. Look in 1 John chapter 15. Not 1 John, John 15. 1 John doesn't have 15 chapters, so if you go there, you'd be looking forever. John 15, verse 9. Jesus sharing, he says, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you obey my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have obeyed my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. My command is this, love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that he laid down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. You notice Jesus puts something on there. He's like, you're my friends if you do what I command. Why would he throw that on there? Because, number one, there's a purpose there. We're working together. And to be friends with Jesus means we do, and our hearts are united, we do what he does. Otherwise, we become an obstacle to what he's trying to get done. And so God bases friendship on obedience. Why? Because it's a respect thing. The guy in 1982 called me to follow him. Why? Because he could take me somewhere. If I rebelled against it, we wouldn't have a very tight relationship. But I knew that following his direction would be to grow a lot quicker than just me trial and erroring it, trying to do it on my own. And he took me to a certain level, and then somebody else grabbed me and then took me to another level, and then another person. And that's how it works. It's biblical. But there's an issue of friendship here. Do you have a great relationship with anybody here? How deep is your relationships? Now, the emotional bond was a tough thing for me. I'm not an emotional guy like that. You know, I was raised in the 60s, 70s, where you had John Wayne and Clint Eastwood and rub some dirt in it kind of thing, versus just having a bond. Now, David was a warrior. Jonathan was a warrior. I mean, he chopped off Goliath's head. And yet here they're hugging and crying and all that. It's like, I just couldn't wrap my head around that. Came to church, everybody's hugging. I'm like, no. Do I go in? Do I go there? People coming at me, showing on hand, that kind of thing. But it says that they were sworn to friendship, David and Jonathan. Let's look at what happens. Let's go back to 1 Samuel chapter 22. You guys getting all this? I don't want to give you too much. 1 Samuel chapter 22. Okay, so right after the situation we just read, King Saul is trying to kill David. He's going after him. And David goes, and rather than just killing the king, he decides, I'm just going to remove myself, all right, because the king was anointed by God. I'm just going to remove myself and go hide in a cave. But look what happens, chapter 22, verse 1. David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and his father's household heard about it, they went down to him there. All those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their leader. About 400 men were with him. Now you got to understand how dramatic this is. David goes and hides in a cave, and you got 400 men wanting to be with him. Now there can't be anything comfortable about living in a cave. And David had to look at their situation. These guys, it says, it's the 3 Ds, all right? They were in distress, in debt, and discontented. They were not a happy crew. Why would they be looking for David? Because they knew he cared about them. And they knew that he was a godly man that could help them. Would anybody follow you to a cave? Because of your incredible love. Because of your incredible unity. What would happen? And it shows that David had their hearts. And if you read on, you'll find out that these men became David's mighty men. And they became warriors that did crazy things. And see, we are in a battle for souls. We're in a battle. There's a lot of evil going on out there in Milwaukee and the state. And the goal is for people to come in and get rescued so they can help others also. You know, we need to imitate those who care about people in the church. And a lot of you do. I was going to start naming people. I thought, you know what, I'm going to miss half of them. Because it sounds like there's a lot of great hearts. But if you're not there, take it there. Let's get united in mind and thought. We need to care. Because united we stand, divided we fall. I have some great friends here in Milwaukee, in the church here. And I appreciate you guys. You make my life a joy. You know, I think about Aaron Legan. We've known each other since the late 80s. And we've been through some battles together, okay? There's no one here who knows me like Aaron Legan does. Just, you know, and he adds something to me that helps in a tremendous way. I think about Tim Hallmark. You know, 1990, we got to know each other. Now, Tim can get quirky. Yeah. That's what I need. It's that little bit of joy that he brings to the plate here. You know, unfortunately for Tim, Lynn gives him these dad jokes things, books on dad jokes. So he's got consistently bad jokes. You gotta love it. I think about Vlad. Vlad's a great friend for me. All right, now we were in the battle in New York. New York is nothing to mess with, okay? It's a challenging and stressful thing. Love to go visit, don't want to stay. Am I wrong, Gladys? Yeah, she lived in Brooklyn for how many years? Your whole life, right? Is it nicer here? Yeah, absolutely. But there's when we're in a battle together, you get united because you have to support and encourage one another. You know, I think about Marcus. Marcus and I studied the Bible with Marcus back in Chicago. Chicago, same thing. You got a lot of challenges there. And Marcus and Heather went through a challenging time, and guess where they wanted to come? Milwaukee. And Kip was all for it. And we're so grateful for you guys to come and support us. Love you guys. Of course, there's Victor Montano, and he's not here. Victor and Marlene have been with us from the beginning. They were just these young, goofy kids. They're just always, you know, and then they got married and then came with us. They led the Latin ministry in Chicago, New York, and then they came here. But there's a special thing with them because they've been trained, they've been raised up, and now it's very hard to send them off. And that's a ripping hearts, and I know a lot of you feel that. That's a good feeling. That says something awesome happened here. And that's awesome. Think about Johnny. Like I said, he was just a little guy, raised up, knew him, and now he's back, and I'm very excited for Johnny to be back with us. You need to have the relationships that you forge in battle together, the highs and the lows. And in that, you can't substitute that. We need to create that here. And then we can talk about old times. Do you remember the time when? Yeah. And you know, God allows us to be victorious, but it's a lot of suffering to get through. Now, I've seen the damage of disunity over the years. I've seen it. Horrible thing. You guys, is anybody in here whose parents are divorced? It's horrible. Horrible thing to go through. You know, the disunity in churches, you know, we pulled out of the old movement. It was painful. But it does something to your character. What did they say? If it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. Yeah. And I believe that's true. The question is, when someone leaves, does it make you stronger or do you do a nosedive? Then it says you're not united, not with Jesus, not with God. It's a worldly relationship. Because God has great plans for all of us. See, it's easy to be disunified, hard to be unified. What are you willing to do to be unified? Jesus died on the cross. You know, we read earlier, why not rather be wronged? Was he wronged? Why not rather be cheated? Is that your spirit? Jesus believed in unity so much that he was willing to be tortured to death and die so we could know him. You know, the Civil War was not fought for slavery. I don't know if you know that. It didn't begin because of slavery. It began because the North and the South were starting to get divided in many areas. And, you know, the North fought for keeping the Union together, unification. The South for independence. And that's why it fought. Now, it was 3 years later when the Emancipation Proclamation happened. 3 years into it. That's when slavery really kicked in. Now, there are other people who had issues with slavery all the way back to Andrew Jackson's days, okay? And so that was a constant problem, but the real issue was keeping United States unified. And I want you to think about the ramifications of this. If we were split, what would have happened? What would this be like? It'd be a lot weaker. What would have happened in World War I? I mean, the United States came in there and rescued the day. What would have happened in World War II? What if Hitler won? We would have been a lot weaker. I don't think we could have fought that because we were divided. And it's the same thing. We're more powerful together than divided. Now, here's my greatest fear. It's for your kids. For you and your kids. When you get to be my age, what is society going to be like then? It's going bad. And I believe the darkness is going to be more dark and the light is going to be more light. Because the separation will be greater. But what are your kids going to go through? This is why we need to keep this going. This provides hope for your kids. You got to fight for this. If the church is gone, what hope do they have? If the church is watered down and looks just like a social group, what good is that? Versus standing your ground and rescuing your children and rescuing this city. Will you keep the church together? Will the Bible continue to be your standard? And really, that's why a lot of churches are divided, why the churches fall apart. We need to provide hope. And we do that by being united in thought. This needs to unify us. I'm going to close with a challenge. I want you to commit to walk together. Start thinking team. Start thinking family. Make every effort to keep the bond of peace. And be united in our purpose. Right here. Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That's the Great Commission. That's what Jesus said we're to do. Now, we can have fun doing it. And have family. But we still have a purpose. We need to be united in our purpose, united in God's purpose. Because united we stand, and divided we fall. Amen.